It began with laughter, or rather, mockery. What was meant to be satire soon became a spark that set fire to an already fragile empire. When South Park aired its brutal parody of the Sussexes, Meghan's name ricocheted across continents like a scandal reborn. The show didn't just mock her, it questioned everything she believed she'd built. To the public, it was a comedy. To Meghan, it was cruelty masked as humor. For years, she had fought to reclaim her image, to rise above the relentless swarm of tabloids and critics who painted her as a villain in royal disguise. But this felt personal. Behind the closed doors of her Montecito home, the laughter from television screens around the world wasn't background noise, it was betrayal echoing through every wall. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Her team moved swiftly. Legal drafts were drawn up within hours, a blur of determination and disbelief. Every line in the complaint carried her fury, every word a statement that she would no longer be mocked into silence. They warned her, of course. They told her that satire is untouchable, that fighting comedians was like punching fog. It makes a scene, but lands nowhere. But Meghan was tired of being a punchline. She wanted justice, even if the world called it revenge. She didn't see it as a lawsuit. She saw it as a reclamation of dignity. Yet dignity, once bruised in public, becomes harder to recognize in the mirror. The news leaked before her lawyers could finish their morning coffee. Meghan Markle threatens legal action against South Park. Read the headline that spread like wildfire. The press tore into it with glee. Talk shows, late-night hosts, and social media pundits all found new fuel. The Duchess, they said, was proving the parody right. Every legal whisper became a headline, every rumor an echo chamber. Harry, ever the cautious one, tried to slow her down. He had seen this cycle before, the outrage, the isolation, the inevitable storm. But Meghan couldn't hear him through the noise. To her, restraint looked too much like surrender. In Hollywood, producers murmured over their morning espressos, PR strategists traded smirks, and executives wondered how far she'd go this time. Meghan's team doubled down, convinced they could turn this into a lesson about respect and accountability. But the truth they didn't yet see was simpler and far more dangerous. The public wasn't laughing at the joke anymore. They were laughing at her reaction. What she viewed as a stand for integrity, the world saw as another royal tantrum. The harder she tried to command respect, the more the crowd saw desperation. And so, the lines between comedy and catastrophe blurred. Lawyers debated the limits of parody. Pundits debated the limits of pride. Even her allies began to wonder if this was the hill worth dying on. Meghan, undeterred, pressed forward, believing that silence would mean defeat. But somewhere between the fury and the formality, she missed the one truth that could have saved her. The joke wasn't the problem. The reaction was. But as Meghan's legal letters made their way to Hollywood's most fearless creators, what came back wasn't fear, it was fire. While the world speculated, Trey Parker and Matt Stone did what they always did best: laugh in the face of outrage. The moment Meghan's cease and desist landed in their inbox, they didn't panic. They poured whiskey, exchanged a knowing glance, and said two words that would echo through Hollywood: bring it. For decades, the creators of South Park had built their empire on defiance, mocking presidents, pop icons, and even religions without flinching. But this time, their target wasn't just another celebrity. It was a duchess, armed with lawyers, and the weight of royal drama behind her. Meghan's letter was meant to draw a line. Instead, it became the spark that ignited a creative rebellion. The notice was formal, polished, and dripping with quiet fury. It accused the show of defamation, misrepresentation, and emotional harm. But to Parker and Stone, it read like a dare. Within hours, they were back in the writer's room, not apologizing but brainstorming. Every insult hurled their way only fed their energy. Meghan wanted silence. They wanted chaos. And in that war, chaos always wins. As word of the legal notice leaked online, the internet did what it always does. It chose sides. Memes flooded social media, mocking Meghan's attempt to challenge the unchallengeable. "You can't cancel South Park," one post read. "They cancel you." Soon, hashtags like #South Park wins and #Markle meltdown began trending. Commentators called it a PR suicide in real time. What Meghan's team viewed as an act of self-defense had quickly turned into the world's favorite new punchline. Influencers, comedians, and late-night hosts all joined in. Some applauded her bravery, but most saw the arrogance of a duchess trying to police laughter. Hollywood, however, understood what was truly coming. Behind the smirks and jokes, industry insiders whispered that Parker and Stone would turn the entire fiasco into their next episode. "They'll go nuclear," one producer murmured. "That's how they work. If you come for them, they make sure the whole world laughs with them." Inside Meghan's camp, the mood shifted from outrage to dread. What began as a confident strike had become an uncontrollable wildfire. Her advisors debated pulling back, but it was too late. The headlines had already cemented the narrative. Meghan Markle versus South Park. It wasn't just a legal dispute anymore, it was a cultural standoff. Every time she tried to reclaim the narrative, the internet twisted it further. And in this digital coliseum, the crowd always cheered for blood. The Duchess, once seen as the rebel royal, was now painted as the humorless antagonist trying to silence satire. Behind closed doors, Meghan's frustration boiled. She couldn't understand why her pursuit of respect was met with ridicule. To her, it wasn't about ego, it was about fairness. Yet every step she made seemed to prove her critics right. Parker and Stone, meanwhile, leaned into the storm. Leaks from their studio revealed laughter-filled meetings, creative chaos, and an unspoken mantra guiding their next step. Make it bigger, make it funnier, make it hurt. By now, Meghan wasn't just fighting two irreverent writers. She was up against an institution that thrived on controversy, that found power in being mocked and joy in being hated. The more she pushed, the more unstoppable they became. The world had turned her outrage into entertainment, and every attempt to fight back only amplified the spectacle. And as her team scrambled to contain the fallout, one line from a Hollywood insider began circling the internet, repeated like a prophecy. "Never fight comedians who own the microphone." But what Meghan didn't realize was that she wasn't just fighting two men. She was taking on an institution that thrives on chaos. In London, the laughter was quieter, but far more dangerous. Behind the marble corridors and polished silver of Buckingham Palace, a storm brewed in whispers. Aides exchanged glances over morning briefings. Somewhere between the formal memos and guarded smiles, a truth lingered unspoken. This could help us. For years, Meghan had been a problem they couldn't confront without consequence. But now, she was undoing herself publicly, spectacularly, and without any royal interference. Each headline from across the Atlantic was another brick crumbling from the foundation she'd tried to build. And the palace? They simply watched. The communications team worked with silent precision, monitoring the growing chaos from their carefully guarded offices. Every tweet, every segment, every joke aired on late night, television was cataloged, analyzed, and quietly celebrated. It was the first time in years they didn't need to defend the monarchy. Meghan was doing it for them. "She's making our job easy," one aide reportedly said, half in disbelief, half in delight. Because for the firm, silence wasn't absence, it was strategy. They knew the public didn't need statements anymore. All they needed was contrast, her noise against their calm, her outrage against their restraint. King Charles, ever the pragmatist, remained silent. He understood the weight of optics better than anyone alive. His advisors told him to stay above the storm, to let the Duchess play out her own drama across the ocean. And so, he did. But even within his circle, there was unease. Not from fear, but from fascination. They'd watched Meghan and Harry burn bridges before, but this time was different. This wasn't a royal feud, it was a cultural implosion. And across London's drawing rooms and private clubs, the elite murmured with satisfaction. The runaway Duchess had finally run out of goodwill. Meanwhile, Meghan's allies in Hollywood began to retreat. Quietly, subtly, as if hoping no one would notice. Invitations dried up. Calls went unanswered. Once adoring friends now spoke in cautious tones. The industry that once championed her voice now treated her as a liability. She was no longer the symbol of rebellion she'd once been. She was becoming a warning. To stand beside her now meant inheriting her backlash. And no one in Hollywood, least of all those who thrived on image, wanted to carry that burden. The British tabloids seized their moment. For them, this wasn't just a story, it was vindication. The Duchess of Drama read one headline, dripping with mockery. Every photograph, every smirk, every misstep became ammunition. They framed her not as a victim, but as a spectacle, a woman so obsessed with control that she'd lost sight of the stage she was performing on. And the more she fought, the tighter their narrative. Meghan had entered a war where silence was power, and she was armed only with outrage. Inside the palace, no one said it aloud, but everyone understood the truth. This wasn't about winning, it was about waiting. They didn't have to strike, they only had to watch her stumble, one legal letter at a time. And the cruel irony was that the louder Meghan shouted, the smaller her platform became. But as the palace stayed silent, the digital battlefield began to roar, and Meghan's name became its favorite weapon. At first, the internet seemed to pity her. Meghan's supporters flooded timelines with words of defense, insisting she had every right to stand up for herself. They called her brave, misunderstood, unfairly targeted. But sympathy online is a fragile currency, it spends fast. Within 2 days, the tide turned. South Park wins began trending across the globe. And suddenly, the Duchess wasn't the victim of ridicule. She was the source of it. Influencers mocked the lawsuit, comedians rallied around satire, and meme accounts carved her every statement into punchlines. What had started as a defense of dignity was now a real-time public implosion. As the memes multiplied, Meghan's PR team scrambled behind the scenes, desperate to control a narrative spinning out of orbit. They tried to frame her as standing against bullying, as a woman refusing to be mocked for speaking out. But no one was listening anymore. The story wasn't about her courage, it was about her reaction. And reactions, once viral, are nearly impossible to rewrite. For every press release her team crafted, the internet responded with 10,000 jokes. The Duchess's digital image was no longer hers. To protect it belonged to the world, and the world was having fun tearing it apart. Hollywood, too, began to shift uncomfortably. Those who had once championed her cause now went quiet. Publicists advised clients to avoid taking sides. Late-night hosts, who once praised her advocacy, now made her their monologue material. Netflix executives, once confident in her brand power, began to whisper about volatility, about the risk of association. The Duchess, who once commanded the world's attention, was now treated like a liability. And though no one said it out loud, everyone in the industry knew Hollywood doesn't protect those who stop being profitable. Inside Meghan's circle, panic began to simmer. Emails leaked, revealing her team's quiet desperation. One message read, "We're becoming a joke." The phrase echoed like prophecy. Her attempts at damage control were failing because the damage itself had become entertainment. Each new statement from her camp only added fuel to the ridicule. Soon, even her defenders began to distance themselves. The more she tried to reclaim the narrative, the more elusive it became. And yet, beneath the noise, something deeper was happening. Meghan was learning the cruelest lesson of modern fame, that perception isn't destroyed by hatred, but by laughter. Every empire, no matter how glittering, falls not from rebellion or betrayal, but from mockery. The moment the audience starts laughing, the crown begins to crack. But even as the internet feasted, Meghan wasn't done fighting. Her next move would shock even her inner circle. One night in West Hollywood, the lights inside Soho House were low, but the tension was electric. Meghan arrived quietly, her phone turned face down, as if to block out the noise of a world that had turned on her. Her expression was unyielding, a blend of exhaustion and fury sharpened into resolve. Around her sat a small, carefully chosen circle: PR strategists, legal advisors, and brand consultants who had ridden the highs of her global fame and now stood knee-deep in its fallout. Their mission was clear: to reclaim the narrative, to turn ridicule into redemption, no matter the cost. But beneath the sleek professionalism of that dimly lit table, fear lingered. They all knew they were walking a fine line between control and collapse. The meeting began with strategy, but soon spiraled into desperation. One advisor proposed an unprecedented move: a counter-documentary. Something that would not only confront South Park's parody head-on, but expose what they called the hypocrisy of satire culture. Meghan listened intently, her hands clasped, her mind racing. She had spent years defending her image, but now, for the first time, she wanted to attack. The plan was bold, even brilliant in theory, but there was also danger. By striking back, she would revive the very controversy she was trying to bury. Several voices around the table warned her, gently but firmly. "This could reignite everything," one said. "They'll only laugh harder." But Meghan wasn't thinking about laughter anymore. She was thinking about legacy. As the debate grew more heated, Harry's silence became impossible to ignore. He sat slightly apart, his eyes distant, his voice low when he finally spoke. "We said we wanted peace," he murmured. "But this isn't peace, it's war." His words hung in the air, heavy with fatigue. For a moment, even Meghan looked uncertain. But only for a moment. The media had taken so much from her: her voice, her dignity, her peace, and now, she believed, she had to take something back. Control was no longer an ambition, it was survival. By the end of the meeting, plans were already in motion. Draft statements were written, production ideas floated, connections quietly contacted. Every move would be calculated, every word measured. Meghan's team believed they were crafting a comeback. What they were really creating was the spark for another firestorm. None of them could see how fragile their plan truly was, that, in trying to command the narrative, they were about to prove how little command they actually had. When Meghan finally left Soho House that night, there was a strange calm in her stride. It wasn't victory, it was conviction. She had convinced herself this was the only path left. Yet even her most loyal advisor couldn't shake the feeling that something sacred had shifted. That somewhere between defending her truth and rewriting it, Meghan had crossed an invisible line. Because when you fight for your image, your soul takes the first hit. The next morning, Hollywood woke up to headlines Meghan had written herself. But the world reads them differently. It was supposed to be a comeback. Instead, it was carnage. Meghan's carefully orchestrated Operation Reclaim campaign was meant to restore her reputation, to silence the mockery and reclaim her dignity. But from the first press release, something felt off. The tone was defensive, the messaging confused, and the delivery overly polished, painfully controlled. It didn't sound like resilience. It sounded like desperation. Every interview, every article, every planted quote only tightened the noose around the very image she was trying to protect. The harder she tried to win, the deeper she sank. Her team called it a strategic rollout, but the world saw it as damage control. Meghan appeared on magazine covers speaking about strength through adversity, while simultaneously taking veiled swipes at South Park and the culture of mocking women who speak truth. Yet what was meant to sound empowering came across as petty. Social media mocked the campaign's tone, calling it the Duchess versus the cartoon. Even sympathetic outlets began to lose patience. One journalist wrote, "When you explain a joke this many times, you stop being the victim and start being the punchline." Inside her Montecito offices, the tension became unbearable. Advisors clashed behind closed doors, each blaming the other for the fallout. Some urged her to pivot to stop talking about the controversy and focus on new ventures. Others doubled down, insisting she stay on the offensive. But the chaos was uncontainable. Leaks began emerging, small fragments of truth wrapped in rumor, painting a picture of a team in turmoil. Meghan, once so controlled, began to lose trust in her inner circle. Even Harry, weary from the endless cycle of headlines, grew distant. His frustration was no longer whispered, it was visible. He had pleaded for quiet, but quiet was no longer part of their vocabulary. Then came the blow from Netflix. Executives, once enthusiastic about her projects, began pressing pause. Meetings were postponed, emails went unanswered, and behind the scenes, concerns mounted over her brand volatility. What had been pitched as empowerment storytelling now looked like a PR liability. The industry that had once opened its arms to her was now watching her unravel. The same streaming giant that once hailed her voice as a new era of authenticity was now questioning whether that voice still resonated or merely irritated. As her public appearances multiplied, so did the ridicule. Clips of her interviews were edited into viral memes, her words dissected with brutal sarcasm. Every statement meant to inspire was spun into another headline of self-pity. The sympathy she had once commanded evaporated, replaced by collective exhaustion. Even those who once defended her now avoided her name altogether. The British press, with its usual cruelty, found new delight in labeling it a royal meltdown. Behind the glossy facade of her campaign, Meghan's world was fracturing. Her advisors were exhausted, her allies disappearing, and her confidence slipping beneath the weight of ridicule. She had built the campaign to regain control, but what she didn't realize was that the campaign itself had become the proof of her losing it. And just when the noise seemed unbearable, when the headlines reached their cruelest crescendo, the phone rang. It came from London, a voice she hadn't heard in months, calm, cold, and utterly deliberate. Because across the Atlantic, someone unexpected was preparing to speak, and her silence until now made her voice even louder. She didn't name names. She didn't need to. When Catherine finally spoke, her words carried the quiet power of a storm that didn't have thunder to be felt. During a charity interview to highlight mental health awareness, she was asked how she coped with public criticism and mockery. Her response was simple, but devastatingly precise. "Grace under ridicule," she said softly. "Sometimes silence isn't weakness, it's strength. When the world laughs, you just keep working." The interviewer smiled, unaware that history had just been rewritten at that moment. The world knew exactly who she meant. Catherine's calm composure stood in haunting contrast to Meghan's chaos. The Duchess, who had built an empire on emotion, confrontation, and confession, suddenly found herself eclipsed by a woman who didn't have to speak much at all. The press seized on it instantly. "The princess who speaks without speaking," read one headline. Others called it a royal masterclass in restraint. For days, the clip of Catherine's remarks flooded every platform, dissected, replayed, and idolized. And with each replay, the unspoken comparison grew louder. Catherine didn't need to defend herself, and that made her victory complete. Behind palace walls, aides knew the impact of that interview went far beyond charity. It had shifted the narrative entirely. What Meghan had tried to fight with lawsuits and PR campaigns, Catherine had dismantled with a single sentence. The royal family's strategy of silence had found its perfect messenger. In contrast, Meghan's attempts to control her image now seemed frantic, even futile. The same media that once mocked the monarchy now championed its quiet dignity. To them, Catherine had become the embodiment of everything Meghan wasn't measured, composed, untouchable. Inside Meghan's camp, fury mixed with disbelief. Her team accused the press of weaponizing kindness, insisting that Catherine's remarks were being manipulated to vilify her. But even they could feel the shift in tone. The online backlash that had once been directed at the monarchy was now turning on Meghan. It wasn't about the legal battles or the satire anymore, it was about perception. In the public's eyes, Meghan had lost the moral high ground. The Duchess of Defiance had met her opposite, and the contrast was blinding. Behind the scenes, tension between Meghan and Harry deepened. He had always admired Catherine's composure, and now it became a silent reminder of what his own household lacked. For Meghan, that comparison was unbearable. Every article praising Catherine felt like another betrayal, another reminder that the woman she'd once seen as an equal now stood miles above her in the court of public opinion. And as Catherine's quiet message rippled through headlines, something else began to shift. The laughter that had filled the internet began to fade, not out of mercy, but out of reflection. The jokes no longer landed the same. Mockery had given way to memory, because when the crowd stops laughing, they start remembering. But before Meghan could rebuild her image, South Park made one final move, a masterstroke that no lawyer could stop. They said they wouldn't go further. They lied. Months after the legal frenzy had quieted and the public's attention began to drift elsewhere, South Park returned louder, sharper, and more merciless than before. The new episode, titled Revenge of the Royals, wasn't just another jab. It was an autopsy of everything the saga had become. From Buckingham to California, no one was safe. The monarchy, the media, and most brutally, Meghan herself, all were dragged into a comedic inferno that blurred the line between entertainment and cultural reckoning. The announcement alone broke the internet. Trailers dropped without warning, cryptic and chaotic, teasing that the joke isn't over. Within hours, anticipation exploded. Online forums speculated endlessly on what creators would dare do this time. Hashtags surged, #Revenge of the Royals, #Round 2, #Let Them Laugh. It was no longer just about Meghan and Harry, it was about the world's obsession with them. The premiere became a global event, drawing millions of viewers across continents. Even those who had never watched an episode tuned in, hungry to witness what many were calling the cultural sequel of the decade. For Meghan, the nightmare was repeating itself, only this time she could see it coming, and still couldn't stop it. Her lawyers explored every possible angle, attempting to intervene before the episode aired. But there was nothing to block. Satire was untouchable, and South Park's creators knew it. Every legal attempt backfired, only fueling more headlines, more curiosity, and more mockery. The world wasn't just watching the episode, it was waiting to see how she would react. And that was the cruel brilliance of it. The episode wasn't just about her, it was for her, knowing she couldn't ignore it. When it finally aired, the effect was instantaneous. The episode portrayed a fictional duchess, a character so obviously modeled after Meghan that denial became impossible. Obsessed with her public image, desperate to control every narrative, and trapped in a cycle of seeking validation while rejecting it. Her husband, equally trapped, wandered aimlessly beside her, torn between loyalty and exhaustion. But this time, the laughter felt different. It wasn't vicious or mocking, it was exhausted. The audience laughed not out of malice, but release. After months of tension, the parody had become a mirror, reflecting a cultural fatigue with celebrity victimhood and the endless war for attention. Critics hailed it as South Park's most brilliant episode in years. "It's not about Meghan," one reviewer wrote, "it's about all of us." They called it a cultural autopsy of modern fame, of how every tragedy eventually becomes content, and every image becomes currency. The episode's genius wasn't in its cruelty, but in its clarity. It mocked not just the Duchess, but the audience that made her relevant, the media that monetized her misery, and the royals who remained silent as the spectacle grew. For the first time, satire had transcended mockery. It had become prophecy. Meghan's team, blindsided, went into crisis mode again. But this time, there was nothing left to salvage. Every attempt at response sounded hollow, every statement more fragile than the last. The episode had stripped away the illusion of control. The Duchess, who had fought so hard to shape her story, was now watching others tell it better than she ever could. The laughter that once felt cruel had become something worse. It was the audience's sound. By the week's end, South Park's ratings shattered records. The show's creators became cultural heroes, hailed for exposing the absurdity of modern fame. Meghan's public persona, once carefully curated and globally adored, now stood as a cautionary tale. The more she fought to own her image, the more the world owned it instead. Because in the end, every spotlight burns those who refuse to step away. And as the credits rolled, Meghan faced a truth no PR team could rewrite. Some stories end not in defeat, but in exposure. Months later, the noise faded, but the damage remained. The world had moved, but not completely. Meghan's once golden image now lived in fragments, part meme, part myth, part mystery. The Duchess, who once commanded global sympathy, had become a cautionary tale whispered in PR boardrooms and entertainment studios alike. Her silence was deafening, her absence deliberate. Friends described her as quieter, more introspective, even withdrawn. Some claimed she was reinventing herself. Others whispered she was simply regrouping. Whatever the truth, one thing was certain: the South Park saga had rewritten her legacy forever. The woman who had once fought to silence laughter had, ironically, become its eternal subject. She stepped back from the spotlight, halting interviews, projects, and deals that had once defined her. Netflix put everything on hold, citing creative realignment. A few close confidants suggested that Meghan was rethinking her brand, carefully plotting how to return stronger. But outside her walls, the world had already written its ending. Public fascination hadn't faded, it had morphed. What was once admiration had turned into something darker, more obsessive. Audiences no longer watched her for inspiration, but out of morbid curiosity. The Duchess had become history and warning. Every whisper, every sighting, every rumor was amplified into an echo of what she used to represent hope turned spectacle, royalty turned irony. Meanwhile, in London, the monarchy stood tall in its silence. The firm didn't need to say a word. Time was doing their work for them. Catherine's calm poise remained unshaken. Charles continued his reign with quiet efficiency, and the palace machine hummed forward, unyielding, unbothered, victorious through stillness. Contrast could not have been sharper. As Meghan's world grew smaller, the monarchy's grip on its narrative became absolute. Their silence was their weapon, their endurance, their revenge. And in that stillness, a subtle message lingered. The crown always outlasts the controversy. For analysts and media experts, it was a modern tragedy told in real time. Commentators called it the PR implosion of the decade. The irony was almost poetic. Meghan's downfall wasn't brought about by scandal or betrayal. It was her own overexposure. The woman who had once escaped an institution to find her voice had drowned in the sound of it. The more she tried to control her story, the less it belonged to her. She had become, as one critic put it, a mirror for everything wrong with modern fame, its fragility, its obsession, its hunger to consume itself. Across the ocean, Trey Parker and Matt Stone accepted Emmy nominations for South Park's Revenge of the Royals. When asked about Meghan, their response was brief but biting. "We didn't make fun of her. We made fun of all of us. It was the perfect summary of her downfall, not personal, but universal, a reflection of how celebrity had devoured authenticity, how sincerity had become spectacle. In the quiet that followed, Meghan's story transformed from scandal to parable, a warning etched into the chronicles of modern royalty. She had gone to war with satire, only to prove its power. And as the lights of Hollywood dimmed on the Duchess of Drama, one truth lingered like a ghost in the silence she finally chose. You can't win against a mirror if what you fear is your own reflection. And as Hollywood lights dimmed on the Duchess of Drama, one question remained unanswered. Was she silenced, or did she finally choose silence?